Remnants of a Forgotten Past by Albane 55, Chapter 6, Stratigraphy. Well, I told her I'd bring her to confront the big cheese. She's probably gonna be mad at the original me, Naruto clone said to himself as he hopped out from his hiding place behind the trees and into the camp itself. Naruto made his way further into the circus encampment as he walked in the direction of the giant tent, passing rows of grim cages. The red and white big top lay before them, with a large wagon parked next to it, and behind it, out of the way, they were both fortified by special defenses, probably to ward off any attacks from enemies and their own Grim. The fact that the Naruto clone arrived meant that the Grim were acting strangely, which in turn meant that the circus employees were running around in a scramble. Some already released Grim roamed the battlefield, but what caught the clone's eyes were not the Grim, but the occupants of the other cages that lay scattered around near the back, not participating in the battle due to being too unfit. Faunus, he uttered in horror. He had seen them before while looking over the horizon, but seeing it up close was a different story that was far more horrifying. The only captive humanoid figures in the area had clearly defined the animal features, from the tails to the ears to the claws. Among other assortments, there was a variety. What there wasn't variety in were the numerous bony, emaciated frames, grimy clothes, and clammy faces of people packed into cages. The first cage had approximately 6 faunus cramped into it, with enough space to where you could move around, but hardly suitable living conditions. There was a bowl on the floor of the cage, a red one shaped very similar to a dog's bowl dish that, when filled, would be with some sort of disgusting slop. Each of the 6 fauna showed signs of physical abuse, cuts, scars, and bruises. A faunus with a dog tail who was staring at him with a forlorn look in his eyes had several old scars from whips inflicted upon his body. One could see those between the tears in old gray fabric of what he was wearing. And the smell was of rotting food, vomit, blood, and feces all meshed together into a hellish stench of unparalleled proportions. Next to the cage was a barrel. He thought back to what half of the circus employees seemed to use as weapons. Whips, electric whips to be precise. Inside that well-placed barrel next to this cage, it contained instruments of torture, stun rods, sharp batons, and more whips. Next cage, there were 8 of them in one. Like the other one, there was a bowl on the floor, which Naruto put the pieces together and determined was their feeding tray. Looking between the 2 cages, all 14 faunas had the posture and gaze of a broken spirit. Could they even talk anymore, or had they been rendered mute? These ones had no scars from lashing, but they were just as emaciated. One of them, an older bear faunus from the looks of it, was scarred in the entire right portion of his face, his eye a milky white. A girl was missing her left hand, like it had been bitten clean off, and yet another was missing a dog ear, the clear symbol of what identified her as a faunus. The Naruto clone growled, clenching his fist at his side as his face twisted in a scowl of anger. His stomach turned. He didn't dare look at any of the other cages. He stalked through the row of wagons, putting a knife into a Grim's back as he sought out the one responsible. His hand shot out and grabbed the ruff of a local circus employee who hadn't noticed him, too busy running around and trying to do his job. He gagged underneath the tight grip as his thumb pressed futilely against the remote control to the Grim cages in a desperate attempt to try and ward off whoever was attacking. "Where's the bastard who runs this place?" Naruto growled as he shook the ruff. The circus employee kept pressing the button and rearing his face to the side away from Naruto, as it was clear that he wasn't prepared for anyone to break through into their camp. The circus employees shivered, but he gestured to the wagon in the back, whether intentional or not. Like a trained tiger, Naruto's eye snapped up to where the employee was looking. The Naruto clone dropped the employee roughly as the fabric nearly ripped, who scrambled away as if his life were on the line. He heard a screech that came from somewhere far away from their position, but Naruto ignored it. He couldn't pay attention to every Grim now. The warriors would take care of it. He had to cut the head of a snake. He was making a beeline to the circus tent. Most of the employees must have been either holed up in their work or out near Katalushu, save for the one tending the Grim cages, who looked at him in confusion. Either they couldn't tell he was an enemy or didn't want to do something to compromise their orders, but they gave a wide berth to the angry blonde boy who was storming through the circus encampment. Deciding to bypass entering the tent itself, the clone bounded over the protective wooden wall. With furrowed brow, Naruto inhaled and exhaled heavily as he approached, walking ominously up to the wooden wagon that was hitched to the circus tent. A red and purple tarp was draped over the wagon, but when the Naruto clone walked up to the wagon, he hit himself in the awning. There were two small windows on the wagon, one on either end. By looking through the window, he saw the plush interior of a one-room dwelling, and the man inside who ran the entire Clover Troop. He was sitting at a small desk in the very corner of the wagon next to his bed, staring down some documents. The Naruto clone continued to stare at him for a few more moments before Von Clapper moved his eyes upward and caught a flash of his blonde hair. "Fuck it," the Naruto clone said, pressing his face into the window and glaring angrily at the man. Van Clapper jumped to his feet as if his desk was on fire. Panic setting in his eyes, he bounded over across the room, trying to make it to the lock. The Naruto clone was quicker. He was on the door with a couple seconds, and peeling it open to come face to face with the one responsible for so much grief as he stood shadowed in the doorway. Van Clapper was not a large man, and the Naruto clone's eyes were able to meet the barely taller geriatric ringmaster. After the moment of panic, Van Clapper's face began to crease while working to regain control over the situation. Back up a little, giving himself a little room and ease his posture a little bit, yet maintain eye contact. He leaned against his own bed away from Naruto and gave a cool smile, trying to show that he wasn't intimidated by Naruto, yet willing to iron out the diplomacy while still stabbing you in the back in a way you wouldn't even realize. He tried to make the intruder think he was in control of the situation, but not to the point where he gave up a mile. Non-confrontational and on your side, ready with a solution that may benefit both parties. All the while, he took note of the position of his scepter, yet did not even instinctively reach for it. Like many things, it was a dust weapon. Otton von Clapper put a jolly old smile that was his facade, the kindly ringmaster who brought joy and entertainment to all. "What can I do for you, son?" he asked. The smile almost reached his eyes. To the untrained eye, it would even appear genuine, no doubt perfected after years and years of practice. "Are you Otto von Clapper?" the Naruto clone asked, raising a kunai and pointing it at Clapper. He made a point of staring for a prolonged period at the cane leaning against the wagon's desk before snapping his eyes back to Clapper. "I know that's your weapon, and don't try anything," was the very clear message. Now, Otto von Clapper knew never to underestimate children in the wilds. Any one of them could be a trained warrior or fighter, whether by choice or necessity. The children of the wilds were often more dangerous than the adults, simply because they raised in their environment and formed a natural affinity coming from being raised that way, and a dependency on their way of life, the only thing they ever knew. This boy clearly knew how to fight. He was subtly threatening the ringmaster, angry, confrontational, and having enough to do and have nothing to do with any of Clapper's attempts to fight back. "Yes, that's me," the old man said politely, tipping his top hat as a gesture of goodwill. Naruto took a step forward, just barely enough as an attempt to intimidate the ringmaster further. "Do you know what you're doing?" "What do you mean, son? We are the Clover Troop, the greatest entertainers this world over. We merely travel from village to village, pleasing our visitors with whatever Cut the bullshit. We know it's your group that's attacking Catalahuk, and we know it's your group that's responsible for all the fondness abducting going on in the area. I've already seen the way you treat them." The Naruto clone growled the last sentence in a low, dangerous tone. It was at that point Otto von Clapper made his first critical error. He assumed that Naruto would share in the outdated racist attitude that were so common the world over. "I feel there is something you should know about that village, young man. We of the Clover Troop provide our employees with the most wonderful benefits. We give them decent wages, sick and vacation day, even insurance and medical benefits for those who live within the kingdom. It sure as hell beats living out here eating grubs or whatever it is you people do to get by day. The Naruto clone exhaled. "Any of the fondness?" he asked angrily. "What of them? That was what I was referring to when I said there is something you should know about the village. No one ever punished a company for treating animals like animals, and thus we will not be either. It is Kalahyuk who is truly hampering them for making them believe they are more than they really are by treating them as humans. Now, the folks over at Kalahyuk tend to think they know what's good for them, but a little hard work never hurt anyone, and I'll be damned if I let my employees be run astray by that tiny village. I mean, look at the way they're living." Crack! The Naruto clone clenched his fist so hard and slammed it into the wooden door frame, which splintered everywhere. His eyes bled a feral red. "You rotten bastard! They're not your employees, they're your slaves!" He roared, his nails lengthening into claws, and his whiskers deepening into thick black marks. His hair became wilder while turning into a slightly darker shade of blonde. His face twisted into a snare as a vortex of Cubi's chakra swirled around him, stifling the air for Otto von Klaver. "Oh, what is this?" The old ringmaster stuttered as he belayed his true emotion, feeling control slip from his grasp at this boy he felt he could no longer handle. His brain was crying at him with the flight response, instinctively trying to put distance between himself and the threat, but he found his back was already hitting the wooden wall. His face twisted into an expression of fear as his teeth chattered uncontrollably. His heart nearly pounded out of his chest. He tried to move his hand, but found his fingers were numb and shaking. The wood of the wagon splintered and began to collapse on itself, but the trucker was the Naruto clone's zero-tailed form was too much for him to focus on his collapsed home. Tendrils of chakra twisted around, and in the dancing shadows, Clever thought he could see the grotesque image of a fox-like creature, more despicable than any grim in the world. "What are you?" he asked as Naruto stared himself down and growled, baring his fangs. He slowly took a step forward, practically savoring the moment and his anger. At that moment, a ring stone went off. If the Naruto's clone rage had been berserk, Clever would be dead by now. But this was the QB's colder rage, one that didn't burn quite as hot, but no less intensely. And so the Naruto clone observed. He watched Von Clever fumble around like a fool in his fear, his hand finding his way into his pocket and fishing out his scroll. Naruto watched in curiosity, mesmerized by the technology that they didn't have in his world. Yes, hello?" Van Claver sounded both nervous and excited, like he was hoping for someone that would save him while simultaneously pivoting his head and Naruto with a wary eye. Now that his polite front was spoiled in front of this boy, he would have to try a different tactic, and as he listened to what his manager was telling over him on the scroll, he started to regain confidence even in front of this monstrosity. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mainfall. I have to call you back another time. I'm in a bit of a bind right now," he stammered as he clicked the scroll off as his shadow fell over him. Naruto punched the hole right next to where Claver's head would have been, mere inches away as the ringmaster yelped. His scroll fell from his hands and clattered next to the ground uselessly. "What do you want from me? Money? Fame? It's all yours. I can give it to you as long as you spare me," he sniveled, cowering in the corner, his foot situated right next to his scepter. Slowly, the confidence began to return to his voice. "I'll even free those filthy faunists you seem to care about so much," and called the attack off Kataluku. Naruto's eyes panned up. "What? You heard me. Spare my life and I will free every one of those faunists and leave the village of Katalyuk alone." Whether it was true or not, Van Claver suddenly felt like he was once again in control of the conversation because of his bragging chips. Naruto breathed out, but his eyes still bled red. Otto Van Claver reached over to his scepter, but Naruto was too numb to stop him. The old ringmaster wasn't done though. "On another condition though, there's something else I want," he trailed off. "What?" Naruto growled. "You." He pointed. "I want you. You're the biggest freak I've ever seen in my entire life. My heart hasn't beaten this fast in decades. The exhilaration, the terror, they were the realest thing I've felt in years. Even in the wastelands of Grim, I have never felt such raw malice. I need you." His voice shone with green and his face twisted into a crooked smile. "Now that I think about it, you can look like a faunus, but people would fork over the lien to see some blonde kid turn into a monster before their very eyes. It would be the greatest show in the world." Naruto's eyes twitched. More and more of the Kyuubi's chakra poured out of his pores. As in his zero-tailed state, his mind progressed from cold fury to an outright hot one. "You think I'll be a part of your stupid little sideshow?" The Naruto clone roared, chakra indulging around in tendrils that whipped the air and the wood around them. Clever's smile faded as quickly as it came. The fear was back when the demon chakra was ignited again. Negotiations broke down. He flipped open a panel on the gold of his scepter just as Naruto began preparing to rush him. He pushed the red button down. Black dust immediately swirled around him as Naruto halted in his tracks and sneered as the vortex surrounded the man. "I will get you, boy," he snarled. "I will own you. I have connections," he said as he disappeared into a cloud of black dust that teleported him away from the scene. Naruto stood there dumbfounded, the red slowly fading from his eyes. Just moments before, he had been seconds away from killing the leader of this whole nasty operation, but in the last moment, the old man had a trick up his sleeve to escape. When the clone's eyes faded back to blue, a feeling of regret washed over him. Under the influence of Kyuubi, his selfishness and anger had reigned supreme. He threw away a chance to save those faunus and the village. He punched the ground. "Stupid!" He swirled around like a top, kicking open the door and rushing back into the fairgrounds. "I can still at least free those faunus myself and get them back to the village to save everyone. These guys are missing their leader now. What's going to happen?" He halted in his tracks one last time, his mind whirling. At the moment, those faunas were probably safest in their cages. Freeing them now would just be exposing them to a battlefield full of Grimm. The clone furrowed his brow, putting his hands into a seal ready to dispel himself. He would get this information back to the original, who would know to free the faunas after the area is safe and the troop have been defeated. Naruto was in the middle of the battle against the Grimm when a flood of information assaulted his senses. He paused and stood rigid. As he cut through another beowulf, he realized that this flood was different than the others and far more serious. He had known for a while that the clones he had left on the other side of the village were being dispelled. He was so swamped with keeping the Grimm at bay, he barely had enough time to create more, and creating them in a precise location took time and effort since he wasn't exactly used to it yet. It was the juggling of two different tasks at the same time, with both of them requiring all his mental focus since the drop in the warriors' numbers was apparent. A flood of information came back to him at one point, and he froze at what it entailed. This information, he couldn't help but pause and think. The clone he had sent into the encampment had made it through, and had apparently contacted the ringmaster. It was like the sudden feeling that he had been there, and a pit was gnawing in his stomach when he realized what had happened, and the terms in which Clever escaped. "Guys, flee us!" The dear woman paused. "Archer!" So did the big man. "Clever is gone. My clone confronted him, and he managed to escape." "What?" Flidice roared. "I thought you said you were going to take care of that," she said, and going up to him and grabbing fistfuls of his jumpsuit and shaking him violently. "Enough, Flidas," Archie barked. "We don't have time for that. Clever had left, but we're still fighting. They're like a chicken with its head cut off, but one that refuses to die. We have to force the leftovers out of the village." Naruto looked at Archie, then back to the village itself. He cracked his knuckles and grinned. "You guys handle the front. I'll go back in a sec after I take care of those idiots out back," he said, deciding to pay them another personal visit. When he got there, the line of clones was still intact in some manner. No one had broken through into the village yet, and Neptune lay defeated on the ground in front of the other circus markers. "All right, here's the deal." Naruto started, standing in front of all his clones and staring down the bald leader of the circus fighting squad. "Your boss ran away like a coward, and you guys can't get through my clones." That seemed to stay their weapons and lower their morale, but only slightly before the disbelief set in. "Your meal ticket is gone. You can keep trying to fight, but me and my clones will make sure you ain't setting foot in this village." Some of the other clones snickered and cracked their knuckles. "Huh, like we would let a couple hundred blonde brats intimidate us. Get 'em, boys." "Skrrr!" The roar of Nevermore was close. A thick shadow fell over the two belligerent groups near the rear cliffs of the village. A gust of wind almost knocked a few of the lighter men off balance. As the Nevermore pounced, talons formed and goring a few uncomfortable circus workers as it swooped by. "A Nevermore!" Neptune shouted. "Clever doesn't have one of those." The sudden swoop had scattered and disoriented some of the circus workers. Naruto had flopped forward to avoid the thing, landing in front of the line of clones as the real Naruto rushed out forwards himself. "The roars are getting louder. Are we even sure Clever has this many Grimm?" one of the workers shouted, straining his head to take a look at the battlefield on the other side. "Grimm are attracted to negativity. Some were sure to show up on top of the ones we released. Still, this seems excessive. Look." Two more Nevermore were now circling the village, getting into a pattern with the ones that had bore down on the group as they circled the entire village. More screams broke out as the defenseless village pointed and murmured at the sky, noticing the new problems that they had to deal with on top of the existing set. Naruto's eyes widened, dispelling all of his clones as he swallowed profusely. A few weapons clattered to the ground from some of the circus workers' numb grasp, fear emblazed in their faces. The earth began to rumble. A Goliath emerged from the treetops. "What is going on? This is too many Grimm!" the bald leader roared. Naruto locked eyes with Neptune. "Well, we can either work together and at least try to fight them off. You can run away, or we can all die together," Naruto remarked. "Your leader is gone. There's no reason for us to fight now, and I think the village would be more thankful if you just made yourself scarce." The bald leader seemed poised to respond with a resounding negative, but the looks on all their faces gave him pause. He turned his back, but when he did, the footsteps signaling a mass exodus indicated that his team chose a different path than he did. "Hey, you idiots! Where do you think you're going?" He asked as nearly every circus worker began simultaneously running along the edge of the cliffs in a direction completely away from the fracas. "Shit!" he cursed, beginning to jog in place. "You brat! I won't forget this!" he yelled, making his own hasty retreat after his men. Naruto watched them go and tightened his headband before noticing that only Neptune remained standing there. You're not going to go with them?" he asked. "We're not friends. I don't even like them," he said. "I think I'd much rather stay here and defend this place. I only did it because I was employed by the Clover Troop, but I think I need to help clean up my mess." The roars of the Grim were practically deafening, nevermore circling overhead like vultures as the mountains of Grim began to enclose on the small little village in the wilds. End of chapter 6.